The storm had begun before dawn. By sunrise, the lower fields had disappeared beneath a sheet of brown water. Rain struck the barn roofs in hard, slanting lines, and the drainage ditch behind Nathan Cross's farm had overflowed into the soybean ground. At 6:30, Nathan's harvesting crew tried to move the last loaded grain cart away from the low field. They made it less than 50 yards. The cart carried nearly 30 tons of wet corn. Its front wheels crossed an old drainage line hidden beneath the crop residue, but the rear axle broke through the saturated surface. One side dropped suddenly, tilting the cart toward the ditch. The tractor pulling it stopped before the cart overturned. When Nathan arrived, the rain had eased, but water continued rising around the buried wheels. He stepped from his pickup and immediately saw the danger. The cart was not merely stuck. Its right rear wheel had sunk almost to the hub, and the frame leaned toward the flooded ditch. If the soil collapsed beneath it, the cart could roll, spilling grain and possibly pulling the attached tractor with it. Nathan ordered the crew away from the downhill side. Then he called for his largest machine. 20 minutes later, a T5's 000 modern tractor approached from the north field. It came through the mist with its LED work lights still burning. A massive green body riding on 8 wide tires. Mud collected on the lower panels, but the cab remained clean and sealed. Several farmhands watched with visible relief. The machine had more than enough engine power. It had 4-wheel drive, automatic transmission control, electronic traction management, and a hydraulic system capable of handling implements larger than the trapped grain cart. Nathan climbed into the cab. A display lit beside him, showing tire pressure, wheel slip, transmission temperature, engine load, and the tractor's position on a field map. He selected a low-speed pulling mode. Outside, the crew attached a heavy recovery cable to the grain cart's front frame. Nathan examined the camera view from the rear hitch. "Clear the line," he said over the radio. The workers moved behind the trucks. Nathan eased forward. The cable lifted from the mud and tightened. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then the trapped cart shifted. One of the workers raised both arms. "It's coming." Nathan increased power carefully. The modern tractor's tires compressed into the wet soil. Its engine note deepened, but the cab remained smooth. The transmission adjusted automatically as resistance increased. The grain cart moved another foot, then its buried wheel dropped deeper. The frame leaned sharply. Nathan released the throttle. The tractor stopped. Rainwater ran down the windows while warning icons flashed briefly on the display. The system had detected excessive wheel slip and reduced torque before the tires could dig themselves into the ground. Nathan studied the numbers. The tractor still had power available. The soil did not. "We need a straighter pull," he said. His foreman, Mark, looked toward the ditch. "There's no room on that side." "Then we pull from the road." Nathan pointed toward a gravel lane nearly 100 feet away. The crew began repositioning cables. None of them noticed the old pickup approaching from the south. Elias Ward drove slowly through the rain, towing a low trailer behind him. A dark shape stood beneath a canvas cover on the trailer. The machine was so large that the cover could not hide its outline. 2 iron wheels rose beneath the fabric, each taller than a man. A heavy flywheel pushed against one side of the canvas, like the rib of an enormous animal. Elias stopped near the barn. He was 61, lean and gray-haired, with a weathered face and hands darkened by oil and soil. He stepped from the pickup and looked across the flooded field. Mark walked toward him. "You heard about the cart? I saw it from the county road. Nathan's got it handled." Elias did not answer. He watched the crew attach the recovery cable higher on the cart's frame. He looked at the angle between the road and the buried wheel. Then he studied the narrow stream of water moving through the old drainage line. The cart was being pulled forward, but it also needed to move upward and away from the ditch. More power in the same direction might only drag the buried wheel deeper through the saturated soil. Nathan saw Elias and climbed down from the modern tractor. "What did you bring?" he asked. Elias walked to the trailer and released the first strap. The Ward tractor. Nathan stared at the covered machine. That thing still runs? When it needs to. One of the workers laughed. Elias removed the second strap and pulled the canvas backward. The Iron Giant appeared beneath it. The machine had been built in 1917. Its body was a mass of blackened steel and faded paint. Rivets lined the frame. The engine cylinders stood exposed beneath a heavy hood. Its rear wheels were made entirely of iron, fitted with thick, angled lugs designed to bite into soil. There was no cabin, no rubber, no hydraulic system, no electronics. A large flywheel sat along the left side of the engine, nearly 5 feet across. Water ran down its spokes. Nathan looked from the old machine to his modern tractor. You brought a museum piece into a flooded field? Elias checked the trailer chains. It was not built for museums. Nathan folded his arms. My tractor has more power than that machine could use without tearing itself apart. Probably. It has traction control. Elias nodded. It will need it. Nathan's expression tightened. You think that can pull the cart out? Elias looked toward the trapped load. No. The workers exchanged amused glances. Then Elias pointed toward the recovery cable. Not from the direction you're pulling. Nathan followed his hand. The road is the only solid ground. Solid ground does not help if the force is pointed into the rut. Nathan glanced toward the rising water. We do not have time for a lecture on old machinery. Then stop pulling the cart sideways. For the first time, no one laughed. Elias climbed onto the trailer and placed one hand against the enormous flywheel. The Iron Giant had not been started in 11 months. Its fuel system required preparation. Its ignition had to be timed by hand. The engine would not wake with the push of a button. Behind him, the modern tractor idled beneath the gray sky. Its screens measured every change in temperature, pressure, and wheel movement. The Iron Giant measured nothing. It waited for the farmer who understood what the ground was doing. Mark watched Elias reach for the starting handle. You're not seriously taking that thing into the field. Elias looked once more at the grain cart leaning toward the flooded ditch. Then he set the handle into place. That depends, he said, on whether Nathan wants to save the machine or prove his tractor is stronger. Elias was 12 years old when he first learned that the Iron Giant did not behave like other machines. It was the winter of 1977. A storm had buried the county beneath ice and heavy snow. Power lines sagged across the roads, and several farms lost electricity for days. At the Ward property, the dairy barn depended on an electric motor to run the water pump. By the second morning, the storage tank was nearly empty. The cows still needed water. Elias's father tried to start the newer diesel tractor, but the cold had thickened the oil and drained the battery. They warmed the engine with lanterns, cleaned the terminals, and tried again. The starter clicked. Nothing else happened. Elias's grandfather, Amos Ward, watched from the doorway of the old machine shed. He was already past 70, with shoulders bent from decades of work. He listened to the failed starter, then turned toward the back of the shed. Under a layer of dust stood the Iron Giant. Even then, the tractor was 60 years old. Its fuel tank was stained. Rust covered the edges of the steel wheels. A belt pulley extended from one side of the frame, wide enough to drive equipment that no longer existed on most farms. Elias had seen the machine many times. He had never seen it run. Amos filled the cooling system with warm water, opened the fuel valve, and checked the ignition by hand. He moved slowly, but every movement had a purpose. Elias held a lantern while his grandfather turned the flywheel into position. Why not wait for the diesel to start? Elias asked. Because the cows are thirsty now. Amos wrapped both hands around the starting handle. The first attempt produced only a dull mechanical cough. The second sent a cloud of smoke toward the rafters. On the third, the engine fired. The sound filled the shed. It did not roar like a modern tractor. It struck in separate, heavy beats, each one strong enough to make dust fall from the roof beams. The flywheel began turning, slowly at first, then steadily. Amos guided the tractor outside and positioned it beside the pump house. He aligned the Iron Giant's belt pulley with the water pump shaft and stretched a long, flat belt between them. When the clutch engaged, the belt snapped tight. The pump began turning that. Within minutes, water flowed into the barn tank. The machine did not move a single foot, yet it saved the herd. That evening, Elias asked why the Iron Giant had started when the newer tractor would not. Amos sat beside the stove and held his hands toward the heat. It did not need a battery, he said. Does that make it better? No. The answer surprised Elias. Amos explained that the newer tractor was faster, easier to operate, softer, and more useful for daily farm work. But every advantage depended on a system, a battery, a starter motor, wiring, fuel delivery, controls. When one part failed, the rest of the machine could become useless until the problem was repaired. The Iron Giant had fewer parts standing between the operator and the engine. That did not make it invincible. It made its failures easier to understand. If it stops, Amos said, you can usually see why. Over the years, Elias learned what each part of the old tractor contributed. The large flywheel was more than a spinning mass of iron. It stored motion between the engine's power strokes. When a belt-driven saw struck a knot in a log or a threshing machine received a heavy bundle of grain, the load rose suddenly. A lighter engine might slow sharply. The Iron Giant's flywheel surrendered part of its stored momentum and helped the engine continue until the next firing stroke arrived. The tractor's weight also served a purpose. It was slow and difficult to transport. But once positioned, it resisted sudden movement. A heavy load was less likely to pull the machine sideways or jerk it off balance. Its lowest gear reduced wheel speed until the tractor moved barely faster than a walking person. That reduction increased turning force at the axle and made it possible to apply a load gradually. Amos taught Elias never to mistake sudden force for useful force. A hard jerk breaks chains, he said. A steady pull moves weight. That lesson became important during Elias's first summer working in the timber lot. A storm had dropped an elm across the creek. Elias attached a chain and tried to drag it directly uphill with a newer tractor. The wheels spun. The log rolled against the bank and became wedged beneath another tree. Amos stopped him before he tried again. He moved the tractor to one side, wrapped the chain around a standing oak, and changed the pulling direction. The engine did not become stronger. The log moved easily. Elias remembered asking how that was possible. You were trying to pull through the hill. Amos told him, I asked the tree to turn. It was the first time Elias understood that a machine's power mattered less than where that power went. Years later, the Ward family replaced most of its old equipment. The Iron Giant was pushed into the rear of the machine shed. It powered a sawmill occasionally, but rarely entered a field. After Amos died, Elias's father wanted to sell it. A collector offered a fair price. A scrap dealer offered less, but promised to remove it immediately. The tractor occupied valuable space. Parts were difficult to find. It consumed fuel and required more preparation than any modern machine on the farm. Elias refused both offers. He did not keep it because he believed old machines were superior. He kept it because it preserved a kind of knowledge the farm was slowly losing. With modern equipment, an operator could press a button and receive an answer from a screen. The Iron Giant required questions. Was the load aligned? Was the ground firm enough? Was the belt too tight? Was the hitch low enough? Was the engine slowing because of fuel? Ignition. Or too much resistance? The machine forced its operator to understand the work before demanding that the work be done. Elias spent years maintaining it. He repaired the magneto, replaced worn bearings, sealed the fuel tank, and had a cracked gear, machined by an old industrial shop 2 counties away. He never polished it for display. The rust stains remained. So did the dents. Now, beside Nathan Cross's flooded field, Elias stood at the same flywheel Amos had turned during the winter of 1977. Across the water, the grain cart leaned farther toward the ditch. The modern tractor idled nearby, waiting for another attempt. Elias did not trust the iron giant because it was old. He trusted it because he understood every reason it might fail and every condition under which it could still work. Nathan ordered the crew to move the recovery line to the gravel road. From there, the modern tractor would have firmer ground beneath all 8 tires. The distance was longer, but the machine would no longer be fighting the same saturated soil surrounding the grain cart. The crew worked quickly. They dragged a heavier cable through the rain and attached it to a reinforced point on the cart's front frame. Another worker placed a protective blanket over the center of the line in case it snapped. Nathan inspected the connection himself. He had no intention of letting Elias turn the rescue into a lesson about old machinery. The cart was stuck. Nathan owned the strongest machine on the property. The answer seemed obvious. He climbed into the cab and closed the door. The outside noise disappeared. Inside, the air was warm and dry. The displays showed engine temperature, transmission pressure, wheel speed, and the selected pulling mode. A camera gave him a clear view of the hitch and cable behind the tractor. Nathan entered the estimated load. The system recommended a low transmission range and limited initial torque to prevent sudden wheel spin. He accepted the settings. Outside, Elias stood near the edge of the road and watched the cable angle across the field. The line ran from the tractor to the front of the grain cart, but the cart's buried wheel sat downhill and to the right. The pull would move the cart forward, yet it would also drag that wheel sideways through the softest part of the rut. Mark raised one hand. "Line is clear." Nathan pressed the radio switch. "Everyone stay back." He eased the tractor forward. The cable rose from the wet soil. Its curve disappeared. Every strand became straight. The tractor's engine deepened into a controlled growl as the load reached it. The rear tires compressed against the gravel, while the front axle remained steady. For several seconds, the grain cart did not move. Then its frame shuddered. Mud broke away from the buried wheel. The cart shifted forward nearly 6 inches. The workers shouted. Nathan increased power gradually. The tractor responded instantly. Its transmission selected a lower ratio. Torque rose through the axles. Wheel slip remained within the green range on the display. The grain cart moved again. A foot, then another. The crowd near the barn began to relax. Even Elias had to admit that the machine was doing exactly what it had been built to do. It was applying enormous force with precision, without jerking the line or spinning wildly. Nathan looked through the rear camera and saw the cart moving. He opened the throttle slightly more. The modern tractor pulled forward. The cart followed. For a moment, the rescue appeared nearly complete. Then the right rear wheel of the cart reached the edge of the old drainage cut. The soil collapsed beneath it. The wheel dropped sharply. The cart's grain-filled body leaned toward the ditch. Someone screamed for Nathan to stop. He released the throttle. The tractor halted immediately. The cable remained tight, holding part of the cart's weight. Nathan checked the display. No major fault. Engine load had been high but acceptable. Wheel slip had increased only briefly. The tractor still had reserve power. He looked back through the glass. The cart had moved almost 4 feet, but the buried wheel now sat deeper than before. Nathan climbed down. Rainwater struck his jacket as he walked toward the cart. Mark met him halfway. "We almost had it." Nathan looked at the rut. Almost does not matter. The buried wheel had created a trench behind itself. The direct pull had forced it through saturated clay, but the wheel had not climbed upward. It had acted like a plow, cutting deeper as the cart moved forward. Elias approached from the higher side of the field. "You moved the frame," he said. Nathan did not look at him. "I moved the whole cart. Not the same amount." Nathan turned. Elias pointed toward the tracks. The front moved nearly 4 feet. That wheel moved forward, but it also dropped. Nathan looked down. The evidence was clear. The left side of the cart had advanced across the surface. The right wheel had traveled inside a deepening channel. Mark crouched near the rut. It's sitting against the drainage bank now. Elias nodded. That bank is holding the lower half of the tire. Nathan crossed his arms. So we use more power? No. The answer came too quickly. Nathan's expression hardened. Elias pointed toward the cable. You are pulling the cart along the same line that trapped it. More force will drag the wheel harder against the bank. The tractor moved it. It moved the top of it. Nathan looked toward the iron giant on the trailer. And you believe that machine can do better? I believe the pull needs to change before the tractor does. Nathan gave a short laugh. You came here with a machine that barely moves faster than a man. And your solution is to criticize the angle? The angle is the problem. The problem is 30 tons of grain in a flooded field. Elias walked closer to the buried wheel. He did not touch the cart. The frame was still under tension from the recovery line. He studied the direction of the rut, then looked toward a row of mature cottonwood trees on firmer ground above the ditch. There is an old culvert under this field, he said. Mark nodded. My father put it in before Nathan bought the south parcel. The wheel has dropped beside it. Nathan looked at the ground again. The drainage cut was not visible beneath the water, but its path explained why one side of the cart had suddenly collapsed. Elias pointed toward the trees. If we anchor there and redirect the pull, we can draw the cart forward and slightly uphill. Nathan shook his head. A side pull will roll it? A direct side pull could. Then what are you suggesting? A divided pull. Elias traced the shape in the air with one hand. One line to control the front. One redirected line to lift the trap side away from the ditch. Mark frowned. With what? A block and cable. Nathan looked toward his tractor. My machine can pull from any direction you want. It can. Then why did you bring that? Elias glanced at the iron giant. Because your tractor may need to hold one line while mine works the other. Nathan stared at him. For the first time, the rescue no longer looked like a contest between two machines. It looked like a problem that neither machine could solve by simply pulling harder. Nathan returned to the cab. He was not ready to accept Elias's plan. Not yet. The first attempt had moved the cart. That proved the tractor had enough strength. He believed one more controlled pull, at a better angle, would finish the job. The crew repositioned the cable several feet uphill. Elias watched them work. The modern tractor had already demonstrated its power. The next attempt would reveal whether power was still the thing the rescue lacked. Nathan's second attempt began from a slightly higher position on the gravel road. The crew had moved the recovery cable several feet uphill, hoping the new angle would keep the grain cart from sliding farther toward the ditch. The line now crossed the flooded field diagonally before reaching the cart's front frame. Nathan studied the setup from inside the cab. The tractor's screen showed stable engine temperature, normal transmission pressure, and available traction. The tires rested on compacted gravel rather than soft soil. On paper, the conditions were better. Elias stood near the buried rear wheel. He did not agree. The cable angle had changed, but not enough. Most of the force would still pull the cart forward. Only a small part of it would act uphill. The trapped wheel remained pressed against the side of the drainage cut. Mark approached him. Is this better? A little. Then maybe it's enough. Elias looked at the grain cart's tilted frame. Enough power. Maybe. Not enough lift. The cart's weight was the central problem. 30 tons of grain pressed downward through the axles. On the left side, the tires still rested close to the surface. On the right, the buried wheel had dropped beside the old culvert and settled against the clay bank. Each forward pull forced the tire into that bank. The wheel did not need only horizontal movement, it needed to rise. Nathan's voice came over the radio. Clear the line. The crew moved away. The cable tightened. The modern tractor leaned into the load. At first, the cart moved exactly as Nathan expected. The front axle shifted forward, and the left rear wheel rolled several inches. The buried right wheel did not climb. Instead, it cut deeper into the clay wall. The cart tilted farther. Mark raised both arms. Stop. Nathan released the throttle. The tractor halted, but the cable remained under tension. A thin stream of grain began leaking from a seam near the upper side of the cart. The tilt had twisted the body slightly. Elias walked toward the front corner. "Release the load slowly," he called. Nathan lowered the pulling force until the cable relaxed. The grain cart settled with a heavy groan. No one spoke for several seconds. The second attempt had moved the cart less than the first. More importantly, it had made the angle worse. Nathan climbed down from the tractor. Rainwater ran from the brim of his cap as he approached Elias. "You said the higher line was better." "I said it was a little better. You could have stopped us. You would not have listened." Nathan looked toward the Iron Giant. "And now you expect me to listen because you brought that?" Elias ignored the insult. He walked to the buried wheel and pointed toward the sidewall. "Look at the mud." Nathan saw a thick band of wet clay pressed halfway up the tire. The front edge of the rut was almost vertical. "The tire is not rolling out," Elias said. "It is being dragged against a wall." Nathan crouched. The pattern was clear now. The wheel had moved forward, but the bank in front of it had grown higher. The cable was pulling the cart into the obstacle instead of over it. Mark joined them. "So, how do we lift 30 tons? "We do not lift 30 tons, Elias said. "We reduce what the trapped wheel has to carry." Nathan frowned. Elias pointed toward the left side of the cart. "The opposite wheels still have support. The front hitch is carrying part of the load. We only need enough upward force to help this wheel climb while the main line moves the cart forward." "With a crane?" "With direction." Elias walked uphill toward the cottonwood trees. One tree stood farther from the ditch than the others. Its trunk was thick, and its roots entered ground that had remained firm despite the storm. Elias examined the base. Then he looked back toward the cart. A line running from the Iron Giant through a pulley fixed near the tree could redirect the pull. Instead of dragging the wheel straight into the clay bank, the cable could draw the cart diagonally upward. The modern tractor could remain on the road, controlling forward movement. The Iron Giant would apply the side and upward pull slowly. Nathan followed him. "You want to use that tree as an anchor?" "Yes." "What if the root system fails? We inspect it first." "And what if the cart rolls? The forward line prevents it." Nathan shook his head. "You're describing a complicated rig when I have a machine with enough power to pull the whole load." Elias turned toward him. "Enough power has already moved it twice." Nathan said nothing. Elias continued. "And both times the wheel went deeper." The words landed harder than any accusation. The modern tractor had not failed to produce force. It had produced force in the wrong direction. Nathan looked toward the cart. "What exactly do you need?" "A heavy snatch block, 2 rated cables, shackles, timber for cribbing, and everyone away from the downhill side." Mark nodded. "We have most of that in the equipment barn." Nathan remained uncertain. The plan required trusting Elias's judgment and allowing the old machine into a rescue his modern tractor had been expected to complete alone. But the grain leak was growing. Water had risen another inch around the trapped wheel. Waiting for a crane could take hours. Nathan looked toward the sky. The rain was becoming heavier again. "Set it up," he said. Elias did not smile. He walked back toward the trailer and removed the remaining chains from the Iron Giant. Mark brought the equipment from the barn, while the crew placed thick timber blocks near the trapped wheel. The blocks would not carry the cart's full weight. They only needed to give the tire something firmer to climb onto once it began rising. Nathan watched the work. For the first time, he noticed that Elias had not yet claimed the Iron Giant could pull harder than his tractor. Elias had claimed something more difficult to dismiss, that the load needed to be understood before it could be moved. The old tractor rolled slowly down the trailer ramps. Its iron wheels struck the steel with heavy, deliberate blows. Nathan's machine could measure engine load, tire slip, and transmission pressure. Elias was measuring the one thing the screens had not shown. Not how much force they had, but where the force needed to go. The crew finished rigging the first recovery line before the rain intensified. Nathan's modern tractor remained on the gravel road, facing the trapped grain cart. Its cable was attached to the front frame, positioned to control forward movement. The second line ran from the cart's buried side toward the cottonwood tree. A heavy pulley block had been secured low around the trunk with a wide protective sling. From there, the cable turned toward the iron giant. The arrangement formed two separate pulls. Nathan's tractor would move the cart ahead. Elias's machine would help draw the trapped wheel uphill and away from the clay bank. Nathan studied the setup with growing skepticism. The pulley did not create free power. It changed the cable's direction. Depending on how the line was arranged, it could also reduce the force required at the pulling machine, though the tractor would need to move more cable to produce the same movement at the load. Nathan understood that much. What he did not trust was the machine attached to the other end. The iron giant stood on firmer ground near the barn, its iron wheels dark with rain. Elias had positioned it almost perpendicular to the grain cart, rather than directly in front of it. The old machine looked badly outmatched. Nathan's tractor had hundreds of horsepower, 8 wide tires, and electronic systems monitoring every major component. The iron giant had a steel seat, exposed controls, and a flywheel large enough to crush a man if anything came loose. Mark approached Nathan's cab. Elias says we need both lines loaded gradually. I know how to apply a load. He says not to pull until he gives the signal. Nathan looked through the windshield toward Elias. He is not running this rescue. Mark glanced toward the leaking grain. Someone needs to coordinate it. Nathan said nothing. He started the recovery sequence. The modern tractor's transmission selected a low range. The display showed the front line with slight tension. Nathan increased power until the cable lifted clear of the flooded soil. The cart's frame shifted forward less than an inch. Elias raised one hand, asking Nathan to hold. Then he engaged the iron giant. The old engine struck in slow, heavy beats. Its cable tightened through the pulley, drawing the trapped side of the cart slightly uphill. At first, the movement was too small to see, but the right side of the frame stopped settling. Elias signaled Nathan forward. Nathan added power. The grain cart moved several inches. This time, the buried wheel did not cut deeper into the bank. The plan was working. Nathan watched the wheel through binoculars kept in the cab. The timber blocks near the rut shifted as the tire pressed against them. He increased power slightly. The modern tractor's engine load rose. A yellow warning appeared on the display. Elevated wheel slip detected. Nathan looked at the tires. They still rested on the gravel, but the road's edge had softened beneath the rain. The rear tires closest to the field were beginning to press through the crushed stone into the wet soil below. The control system reduced torque automatically. Forward movement slowed. Nathan pressed the throttle farther. The engine responded, but not fully. The display showed that the traction management system was limiting output to prevent the tires from digging through the road surface. Nathan changed the setting from automatic to manual response. The warning remained. He continued the pull. Outside, the front cable tightened harder. The grain cart advanced another foot, while the iron giant maintained the upward side load. For the first time, the buried wheel began to climb. Mark shouted from a safe distance. It's coming up. Nathan saw the movement and pushed for more. The modern tractor's engine note deepened. The rear tires rotated against the wet gravel. Small stones shot backward. The road surface began breaking beneath the machine's weight. Another warning appeared. Transmission temperature rising. Nathan glanced at the gauge. The reading was not yet critical. He continued. The tractor was operating at low speed under a sustained, heavy load. The engine produced tremendous force, but very little cooling air moved around the machine. The transmission and hydraulic systems were working harder with every second. The grain cart moved another 6 inches, then stopped. Nathan held the throttle steady. The wheel slip percentage increased. The tractor's control system reduced torque again. Come on, Nathan muttered. He disabled one of the automated traction settings. The engine surged. The cart jumped forward several inches. At the same moment, Elias raised both hands. Nathan released the throttle. The buried wheel had climbed partly onto the first timber block. But the sudden movement had shifted the cart's upper body downhill. The cable through the pulley now carried far more tension. Elias climbed down from the iron giant and inspected the line from a distance. "Too fast," he called. Nathan opened the cab door. It moved. It twisted. "It is still higher than before, and one more jump could roll it." Nathan looked toward the cart. The grain body was leaning, but the wheel had clearly risen. His tractor had done most of the work. "We need one stronger pull," he said. Elias shook his head. "We need a slower one." Nathan closed the cab door. He did not wait for Elias to return to his machine. He reapplied tension. The engine load rose rapidly. The tractor's rear tires began slipping at the road's edge. The system detected the difference between wheel speed and actual movement and intervened again. This time, a red warning appeared. "Drivetrain protection active. Power limited." Nathan pressed the throttle. The engine increased only slightly. The machine had decided the demand was unsafe. Nathan opened the settings menu and attempted to reset the pulling mode. The warning returned immediately. Transmission temperature had crossed the software's protective threshold. The tractor remained mechanically capable of producing more force, but its control system refused to provide it. Nathan tried shifting to another range. The transmission would not accept the command while the cable remained under load. He reduced tension, shifted, and tried again. The tractor pulled for 3 seconds. Then power fell sharply. The grain cart stopped. The iron giant continued holding its line, the flywheel turning steadily as Elias kept the cable loaded without jerking it. Nathan's display now showed 3 warnings: high transmission temperature, excessive slip condition, torque output restricted. Mark approached the road, but remained outside the recovery zone. "What happened?" Nathan opened the door. "It is protecting the transmission." "Can you override it?" "Not safely." Nathan hated the answer as soon as he said it. The $500,000 tractor had not broken. Its engine still ran smoothly. Its transmission still held pressure. Its tires still had usable grip. But the machine had calculated that continuing at full output might damage itself. It had chosen to reduce the load. The grain cart had no such protection. Water continued rising around it. Grain continued leaking from the twisted seam. Every minute increased the chance that the soil beneath the downhill side would collapse completely. Elias shut down the iron giant only after the front cable had relaxed. He walked toward Nathan's tractor and looked at the red warning on the screen. "Can it continue?" Nathan stared at the message. "Not at full power." Elias looked toward the trapped cart. "Then we stop asking it for full power." Nathan turned to him. "That machine out there cannot replace this tractor." "No?" Elias pointed toward the pulley line. "But it may not need to." The modern tractor had entered the rescue with more strength than any other machine on the farm. Now its own intelligence was telling it to stop. The iron giant had no screen to protect it. From that moment on, the only protection it would have was the judgment of the man sitting above its gears. Nathan let the modern tractor idle while he worked through the warning screens. The rain had slowed, but the field continued, draining toward the buried grain cart. Brown water moved around the tires in thin currents, carrying corn leaves and pieces of stalk into the ditch. Inside the cab, the tractor remained calm. The engine temperature was normal. Oil pressure was normal. Fuel delivery was normal. But the drivetrain warning would not clear. Nathan reduced the throttle, shifted to neutral, and restarted the control sequence. For several seconds, the red symbol disappeared. Then it returned. Torque output restricted. He opened the diagnostics page. A second message appeared beneath it. Transmission pressure signal outside expected range. Nathan frowned. The transmission had not lost pressure. If it had, he would have felt the machine disengage under load. The tractor had pulled normally until the protection system intervened. He tried the reset again. The result was the same. Mark climbed onto the lower cab step. "Can we use it at reduced power?" "Maybe." "Is that enough?" Nathan looked toward the cart. "No." The right rear wheel had climbed partly onto the timber cribbing, but the cart still leaned toward the ditch. If the support block shifted, the wheel could fall back into the rut. Elias had kept the side cable lightly tensioned with the iron giant, preventing the cart from settling farther downhill. But he could not hold it indefinitely. The tractor's belt, gears, bearings, and engine were all under load, even while barely moving. The old machine needed either to complete the pull or be released. Nathan reached for the radio. "Call the dealership." Mark looked toward the sky. "How long will they take?" "Call them." The service manager answered on the second attempt. Nathan explained the warnings and read the diagnostic code from the screen. There was a pause. "Could be an actual pressure issue," the manager said. "Could be the sensor or connector." The transmission was pulling before the warning. "That does not rule out pressure loss." "What can I check here?" "Inspect the harness near the transmission housing. But do not bypass anything. If the controller cannot verify pressure, it will keep limiting torque." Nathan climbed down. The wiring harness ran beneath a protective panel along the right side of the tractor. Mud and gravel had collected around the lower edge where the rear tires had broken through the road shoulder. He removed the panel. At first, nothing appeared damaged. Then Mark pointed toward a connector near the housing. One side was packed with wet grit. The tractor's movement under load had thrown mud against the harness. The connector seal looked intact, but the cable entered at an angle. When Nathan touched it, the warning tone sounded inside the cab. "There," Mark said. Nathan disconnected the plug and examined it. A small amount of water had reached the terminals. The fault was almost absurdly minor. The tractor weighed many tons. Its engine could produce more force than every other machine on the farm combined. Yet a connector, small enough to fit in Nathan's hand, had convinced the control system that the transmission might be unsafe. He dried it with compressed air from the service truck, cleaned the terminals, and reconnected it. The warning disappeared. Nathan climbed into the cab and restarted the machine. For 10 seconds. The diagnostics showed normal operation. Then the red symbol returned. The signal was unstable. Without a replacement connector or testing equipment, Nathan could not prove whether the pressure reading was false. The tractor did exactly what it had been programmed to do. It assumed the risk was real. Mark stood beside the cab. "So that's it?" Nathan looked at the screen. "The machine still runs, but it won't pull. Not at the force we need." Across the field, Elias eased the iron giant's clutch and maintained tension on the side cable. The old engine struck steadily through the damp air. Nathan looked from one machine to the other. His tractor knew more about its own condition than the iron giant ever could. That knowledge protected it from catastrophic damage. But the same protection had made it useless at the worst possible moment. Elias walked toward the road. "We need to decide," he said. Nathan stepped down. "Decide what?" "Whether we wait for a technician or finish with what still works." Nathan looked toward the grain cart. The leak along the upper seam had widened. A thin stream of corn was falling into the muddy water. "How long can your tractor hold that cable?" "Not long enough to wait." Nathan glanced again at the modern machine. Its engine idled perfectly. Nothing smoked. Nothing rattled. Nothing appeared broken. That made the failure harder to accept. If an axle had snapped or a hose had burst, the answer would have been clear. A damaged part would explain the loss. Instead, the machine had stopped because it no longer trusted the information reaching its computer. Nathan turned toward Elias. "What do you need?" "The modern tractor stays on the forward line at reduced tension. It cannot pull hard. It does not have to." Elias pointed toward the cart. "It only has to prevent backward movement. The iron giant will take the working load through the pulley." Nathan studied the old tractor. "You think it can handle that?" "I think the rig can." "That is not the same answer. No machine handles a bad setup." Elias walked toward the cottonwood anchor. "We shorten the sideline, move the pulley lower, and add another layer of timber under the trapped wheel. Then we pull slowly enough that the wheel climbs instead of cutting." Nathan looked toward the modern tractor's screen one final time. $500,000 of machinery waited for a sensor signal it could trust. The Iron Giant waited only for a man to decide whether the chain, ground, and angle were right. Nathan shut down the modern tractor's high output mode. Then he followed Elias into the field. For the first time that day, the rescue would continue, without the strongest machine leading it. Elias repositioned the Iron Giant before asking anyone to touch the cables. The old tractor could not approach the flooded rut directly. Its iron wheels were narrow, and the saturated ground near the grain cart would not support its weight for long. If Elias drove too close, he could bury a second machine beside the first. He chose a strip of higher ground near the cottonwood trees. From there, the tractor would pull through the pulley, rather than face the cart itself. The setup gave him two advantages. First, the Iron Giant could remain on firmer soil. Second, the pulley redirected the cable so the force reached the trapped wheel at an upward angle. Nathan's modern tractor stayed on the gravel road. Its engine was running again, but the control system still restricted torque. Elias asked Nathan to maintain only enough forward tension to stop the grain cart from rolling backward. Nathan did not like the reduced roll, but he agreed. The crew lowered the pulley sling around the cottonwood trunk. Elias inspected the bark, roots, shackles, and cable alignment before allowing tension onto the system. Then they rebuilt the cribbing beneath the buried wheel. The first timber blocks had shifted during Nathan's stronger pull. Workers removed them one at a time and replaced them with shorter sections laid across the direction of travel. The blocks formed a rough ramp. They would not lift the cart by themselves. Their purpose was to prevent the tire from sinking immediately after it began to rise. Elias walked the full cable path. No one was allowed inside the angles formed by the lines. If a shackle failed or a cable snapped, the stored force could send steel across the field faster than a person could react. He moved the spectators farther back. Only then did he climb onto the Iron Giant. The rain had left water standing in the metal seat. Elias swept it away with one hand and checked the controls. The old machine had no automatic startup sequence. He opened the fuel valve, set the ignition, checked the transmission was in neutral. Then he turned the engine carefully until it reached the proper position. The first starting attempt produced nothing. A worker near the barn laughed. Nathan heard it but said nothing. Elias reset the handle. On the second attempt, the engine coughed and sent a dark pulse from the exhaust. The flywheel moved half a turn, then stopped. Elias waited. He adjusted the fuel mixture slightly and tried again. This time the engine fired. One heavy beat struck through the field, then another. The flywheel began turning. Each spoke slowly, disappearing into a dark circle. The Iron Giant shook beneath Elias. Its exposed linkages moved with every pulse. Water vibrated from the hood and ran down the frame. Compared with Nathan's tractor, it seemed crude and unstable. But Elias listened until the firing strokes became even. He allowed the engine to warm before selecting the lowest gear. Mark stood near the safety boundary, holding a radio. "Nathan's line is ready." Elias nodded. Nathan added light forward tension from the road. The modern tractor's cable straightened without trying to move the cart. Now it served as a restraint. Elias eased the Iron Giant's clutch. The pulley line tightened. The tractor moved several inches, taking slack from the cable. The engine note deepened. The grain cart did not move. Elias continued gently. The steel lugs on the Iron Giant's wheels pressed into the higher ground. The cable pulled through the pulley, changing direction near the tree, before reaching the cart's trapped side. At first, nothing visible happened. Then the buried tire shifted against the clay bank. Mark raised his arm. Movement. Elias held the throttle steady. The right side of the cart rose perhaps half an inch. One of the timber blocks creaked beneath the tire. Nathan's line kept the front of the cart from rolling backward. For the first time, both machines were contributing in different ways. The modern tractor controlled the cart. The Iron Giant tried to free it. Elias pulled another foot. The flywheel slowed as the load increased. then recovered after the next power stroke. The tire climbed slightly higher. Then the left rear wheel of the Iron Giant struck a soft patch. It slipped. The old tractor turned several inches toward the cable. Elias disengaged the clutch immediately. The sideline remained tight, but the movement stopped. The crowd began murmuring. Nathan stepped from his cab. "Your ground is giving way." "I know. If you keep pulling from there, it will drag you toward the tree." Elias climbed down. He examined the Iron Giant's wheel marks. The left lugs had cut through the grassy surface into soft soil. They had not reached a stable layer. Another pull from the same position would deepen the trench. Nathan looked toward the trapped cart. "We need to move your tractor." "Not yet." Elias followed the cable with his eyes. The line was pulling cleanly through the pulley, but the Iron Giant was positioned too close to the cable's direction. As resistance increased, the force tried to turn the tractor rather than remain centered behind its rear axle. The machine had enough pulling ability. Its position was wasting it. Elias asked the crew to slacken both lines. Then he moved the Iron Giant farther to the right, placing it on a narrow strip of gravel beside the machine shed. The relocation changed the cable angle only slightly, but it aligned the pull more directly with the tractor's rear axle. Nathan watched. "You lost your upward angle." "Some of it. Wasn't that the entire point? We need lift at the cart and a straight pull at the tractor." Elias adjusted the pulley position lower on the cottonwood and shortened the line. The new arrangement restored the upward component at the trapped wheel without pulling the Iron Giant sideways. The work took 20 minutes. During that time, the grain cart settled slightly onto the cribbing, but it did not fall back into the deepest part of the rut. When the lines were ready again, Elias returned to the seat. Nathan maintained forward tension. The Iron Giant loaded the side cable for a second attempt. This time, both iron wheels remained straight. The engine slowed under the load. The flywheel released its stored motion. The cart moved. Not forward. Upward. The buried wheel climbed onto the first timber block. The crew cheered. But Elias raised one hand. The rescue was not complete. The wheel had risen only a few inches. And the hardest part remained. The tire now rested against the next block, while 30 tons of grain continued pressing down through the axle. Elias looked at the flywheel, then at the cable, then at the path the wheel still had to climb. The first attempt had failed because the old tractor had been pulling from the wrong position. It was the same mistake Nathan had made earlier. Only on a smaller scale. The Iron Giant was not succeeding because it was old. It was succeeding because Elias was willing to stop, read the failure, and change the direction of the force before asking for more. The trapped wheel rested on the first layer of timber. That was progress, but it was not freedom. The grain cart still leaned toward the ditch, and the wheel faced a steeper section of the improvised ramp. Water moved around the blocks, carrying mud into every gap beneath them. Elias stayed on the Iron Giant's seat and studied the line. Nathan's tractor held light forward tension from the road. The old machine carried the side load through the pulley. For several minutes, the arrangement had worked exactly as Elias intended. Then the ground changed again. The timber beneath the trapped wheel began to settle. Not much. Only enough for one block to tilt. Mark saw it first. Right side is dropping. Elias disengaged the clutch. The Iron Giant stopped pulling, but the cable remained tight. Nathan held the cart in position. Workers approached only after Elias confirmed the lines were stable. The upper timber block had been pressed sideways by the tire. Instead of creating a ramp, it now formed a wedge against the wheel. Nathan climbed down from his tractor and walked to the edge of the recovery area. So now what? We reset the cribbing. That wheel will crush anything we put under it. Then we give it more surface. Elias ordered the crew to bring wider timbers from the barn. They laid the new blocks closer together and filled the gaps with shorter pieces. This created a broader platform that would spread the load instead of concentrating it on one edge. The work was slow. Every block had to be placed without anyone standing downhill from the cart. The cables remained lightly tensioned, so the machine could not roll back unexpectedly. When the ramp was rebuilt, Elias returned to the Iron Giant. He let the flywheel reach a steady speed. Then he engaged the clutch. The cable tightened. The trapped wheel pressed against the new timber surface. For a moment, it appeared ready to climb. Elias added a little more power. The Iron Giant's engine slowed. The flywheel carried it through one stroke. Then another. The grain cart rose slightly. Then the side cable shifted inside the pulley. A harsh metallic scrape cut through the field. Elias stopped instantly. The cable had not broken, but it had moved against the outer edge of the pulley wheel. Mud and tension had pulled the line out of perfect alignment. Another foot of travel could damage the cable. Nathan shook his head. This setup is becoming less safe every minute. Elias climbed down and inspected the pulley from a distance. Nathan was right about one thing. The arrangement had too many parts under changing load. The tree anchor was solid. The cable was rated correctly. But the angle between the Iron Giant and the pulley had changed as the tractor moved forward. The line was no longer entering the pulley straight. Elias ordered both tractors to release tension gradually. The grain cart settled onto the rebuilt cribbing. It held. Nathan approached him. You said the old tractor could take the working load. It can. Then why has it stopped twice? Because the rest of the system was wrong? Nathan looked toward the Iron Giant. Or because it is not enough? Elias did not argue. He walked to the old tractor and placed one hand on the rear wheel. The first failed attempt had pulled the machine sideways. The second had damaged the cable alignment. Neither failure came from a lack of engine power, but that did not make them unimportant. A recovery system was only as strong as its worst angle, weakest anchor, or least stable surface. The Iron Giant could not correct those errors by pulling harder. Elias repositioned the pulley higher and farther around the tree, allowing the cable to enter and leave in straighter lines. Then he moved the tractor several feet back so it could complete the remaining pull without changing the angle too sharply. The new arrangement reduced some of the upward force. To compensate, the crew added another layer to the timber ramp. Nathan watched the changes. You're giving up lift. I'm trading some lift for control. Will it be enough? Elias looked toward the buried wheel. It has to climb only a few inches now. Rain began falling again. The water had reached the lowest edge of the grain cart's wheel hub. They had little time left. Elias climbed back onto the Iron Giant. Before engaging the clutch, he looked at Nathan. Hold the forward line steady. Do not try to help. Nathan frowned. My tractor can still provide some pull. That is the problem. Nathan understood. If both machines increased force at once, the cart could surge, twist, or roll off the timber ramp. The next attempt required one controlled load. Nathan returned to the cab. The modern tractor took up the slack and stopped. Elias engaged the Iron Giant. The old engine lowered into a heavy rhythm. The cable tightened through the realigned pulley. The trapped wheel pressed into the timber. Nothing moved. Elias added power slowly. The flywheel began to lose speed. The tractor's iron lugs pushed against the gravel and hard soil beneath them. The wheel rose. Half an inch. Then another. The timber held. The cart moved forward slightly under Nathan's restrained line. For the first time, the trapped tire climbed instead of cutting deeper. The crowd began shouting. Elias did not look toward them. The wheel still had to cross the top of the clay bank. Then the engine missed one firing stroke. The flywheel slowed sharply. The Iron Giant stopped. The cable remained tight. The cart balanced on the edge of the ramp. Elias pressed the clutch before the engine stalled completely. Silence returned. Nathan looked through the windshield toward the old tractor. The machine everyone expected to save the day had failed again. But the trapped wheel now sat higher than it had at any point during the rescue. Only a few inches remained between the cart and solid ground. Elias looked at the flywheel. Then toward the engine. The failure had changed. This time, the ground, cable, and angle had all held. The problem was inside the Iron Giant. Elias climbed down before anyone could approach the cable. The Iron Giant had not stalled because the load was too great. The engine had missed a firing stroke. He opened the ignition housing and found moisture around one of the old contact points. Rain had entered through a worn seal, weakening the spark. Just as the tractor reached its heaviest load, Nathan watched from the road. "So the old machine has problems too." "Of course it does," Elias said. He dried the contact, reset the gap, and sealed the cover with a strip of oiled cloth. The repair took less than 10 minutes. No laptop, no diagnostic code, no replacement sensor, only a visible fault and a mechanical adjustment. Elias restarted the engine. This time, he allowed the flywheel to build speed before applying the load. The large iron disc stored momentum between each combustion stroke, helping the engine maintain a steady pull when resistance rose. Nathan held the grain cart with light tension from the road. Elias engaged the clutch. The cable tightened. The trapped wheel pressed against the timber ramp. The Iron Giant did not jerk forward. It loaded the line gradually, each engine stroke adding to the motion already stored in the flywheel. The cart rose another inch. Then, too, the wheel reached the top of the clay bank. For a moment, the entire load balanced there. Elias held the throttle steady. Too much power could pull the wheel off the timber. Too little would let it settle back into the rut. The flywheel slowed, but it did not stop. Another firing stroke arrived. The wheel rolled over the edge. Mark shouted from behind the safety line. "It's clear." The cart shifted onto the broader timber platform. Its body straightened slightly as the trap side rose. Nathan eased his tractor forward, keeping the main cable tight without adding a sudden pull. Now both machines moved together. The modern tractor controlled direction. The Iron Giant carried the heavier side load. The grain cart advanced a foot, then another. Once the wheel reached firmer soil, Elias reduced power. The hardest part was over. The Iron Giant had not freed the cart by producing more horsepower. It had done so by applying force slowly enough for the wheel to climb, instead of dig. The flywheel had not made the engine stronger. It had made the power steadier. And in that final moment, steady force mattered more than raw force. Once the trapped wheel crossed the clay bank, the recovery changed completely. The grain cart was still heavy, but it was no longer fighting the rut. Its right side now rested on the timber platform, and the frame had returned closer to level. Elias signaled Nathan to move forward. The modern tractor pulled gently from the road, while the Iron Giant maintained tension through the pulley. This time, neither machine tried to dominate the load. They worked as a system. Nathan controlled the cart's direction. Elias prevented the freed wheel from sliding back toward the ditch. The cart advanced several feet. The wooden ramp shifted beneath the tire, but it held long enough for the wheel to reach firmer ground. Once both rear wheels were clear of the drainage cut, the cart began rolling normally. Mark raised both arms. "Keep it coming." Nathan increased speed slightly. The modern tractor finally had conditions it could use. Its tires remained on gravel. The load moved in a straight line, and the transmission no longer faced the same extreme resistance. The grain cart followed. Elias reduced tension on the side cable as the cart moved away from the ditch. When the line slackened, he disengaged the clutch and allowed the Iron Giant's flywheel to slow. The cart reached the road. The crew placed wheel chocks beneath it and secured the leaking seam with a temporary cover. Only then did everyone begin to breathe normally again. The rescue had taken far longer than Nathan expected. His tractor had moved the load first. It had also nearly dragged the buried wheel deeper. The Iron Giant had failed twice, but Elias had corrected the angle, rebuilt the support, repaired the ignition, and applied the final pull slowly enough for the wheel to climb. Nathan stepped down from his cab. He looked toward the old tractor, still connected to the pulley line. Mud covered its wheels. Rainwater ran across the exposed engine. The machine seemed smaller now that the danger had passed. Yet no one was laughing. A worker approached Elias. "How much power does that thing make?" "Not enough to pull the cart straight out." The worker looked confused. "But it did." No, Elias said. The rig did. He pointed toward the tree. Pulley, cable, timber ram, and both tractors. The machine was only one part. Nathan heard him. For most of the morning, he had treated the rescue as a test of horsepower. Elias had treated it as a problem of direction, support, and control. The difference had saved the cart. Nathan looked at the warning still glowing inside his tractor's cab. Then he looked at the Iron Giant's slowing flywheel. The modern tractor had known when to protect itself. The old tractor had depended entirely on Elias to know when to stop. That made it more dangerous. It also meant that, in the right hands, it could continue when a computer would not. The last wheel of the grain cart reached solid gravel. The rescue was complete. The Iron Giant had not dragged 30 tons through the mud by brute force. It had done something more embarrassing to the $500,000 machine. It had solved the part of the problem that power alone could not. The dealership technician arrived after the grain cart had been secured on the road. He connected a diagnostic unit to Nathan's tractor and studied the fault history. The engine was healthy. The transmission had suffered no major mechanical damage. The problem came from the wet pressure sensor connection. Its unstable signal had convinced the control system that the transmission might be losing pressure. The tractor had restricted torque to prevent an expensive failure. Nathan looked toward Elias. So the machine was protecting itself. The technician nodded. That is what it was designed to do. A farmhand pointed toward the Iron Giant. That one didn't protect itself. Elias heard him. No, he said. I had to. The field became quiet. That was the difference everyone had missed. The modern tractor contained systems capable of detecting danger faster than its operator. It could reduce power before heat or pressure damaged the drivetrain. The Iron Giant possessed no such intelligence. If Elias misread the engine, overloaded the cable, or ignored a change in the ground, the old tractor would continue until something broke. Its simplicity was useful that day. It was not automatically superior. Nathan walked around the old machine. Earlier, he had seen only obsolete iron. Now he noticed the low gearing, the enormous flywheel, and the direct mechanical controls Elias had adjusted by hand. My tractor could do a month of work before this crossed half the farm, Nathan said. Elias nodded. It could do more than that. Nathan seemed surprised. You're not going to argue? There is nothing to argue about. Elias pointed toward the rescued cart. Your tractor was built to cover ground, manage implements, and work efficiently. This was not normal field work. Nathan studied the cables and timber ramp. We were solving the wrong problem. You were trying to overcome the weight. And you? I was trying to remove what held it. The answer spread quickly among the workers. The Iron Giant had not humiliated the modern tractor by proving old technology was stronger. It had exposed the weakness in Nathan's assumptions. Nathan had trusted horsepower because horsepower could be measured. Elias had trusted the angle, the anchor, and the ground because those determined whether the power would matter. The technician replaced the damaged connector. Minutes later, the warning disappeared. Nathan's tractor returned to full operation as if nothing had happened. Its engine was still more powerful. Its systems were still more advanced. Its value had not vanished because of one failed rescue. Yet when the machine pulled away from the road, the crowd barely watched it. They remained around the Iron Giant. They touched the steel wheels and stared at the flywheel that had continued turning through the final load. Nathan stopped beside Elias before leaving. I called that thing useless. You did. I was wrong. Elias looked at the old tractor. You were wrong about the job it could still do. Nathan extended his hand. Elias accepted it. Behind them, the two tractors stood within sight of each other. One represented a century of progress. The other represented principles that progress had never replaced. The modern tractor had more strength, speed, safety, and intelligence inside it. But that morning, the most important intelligence had stood outside the machine, reading the land. By evening, the storm had moved east. The flooded field remained scarred by tire tracks, timber blocks, and deep channels where the grain cart had nearly rolled into the ditch. Workers finished transferring the wet corn, while Nathan's repaired tractor handled the job without difficulty. The machine was fast again. Its warnings were gone. Its systems were functioning exactly as designed. The Iron Giant stood near the barn, silent beneath the clearing sky. Elias cleaned mud from the gears, cable hooks, and exposed bearings. He left the rust and faded paint untouched. Nathan approached while Elias was checking the pulley line for damage. "I used to think machines like this survive because people were sentimental," Nathan said. "Sometimes they do. Is that why you kept it?" Elias looked at the enormous flywheel. No. He had kept the tractor because it preserved a way of thinking. The machine could not hide its work behind software. Every change in resistance could be heard in the engine. Every poor angle appeared in the cable. Every loss of traction left a mark in the ground. It forced its operator to understand the load. That was what Amos Ward had really passed down. Not a belief that old machines were better. A belief that power should never be used before the problem was understood. Nathan looked toward his modern tractor. It still would have pulled the cart if the sensor hadn't failed. Maybe. "You don't believe that?" "I believe it had enough power." "That isn't the same answer." Elias nodded toward the old drainage cut. The wheel was still being pulled into the bank. More power might have moved it. It also might have rolled the cart. Nathan considered that. The failure of the sensor had been embarrassing, but it had also interrupted a bad approach before the situation became worse. The modern tractor had protected itself. The Iron Giant had required Elias to protect everything around it. Neither system was perfect. One depended on electronics. The other depended on judgment. Nathan helped Elias coil the recovery cable. "What happens to this machine now?" "It goes back into the shed." "After all that, it has no field work tomorrow." Nathan smiled slightly. The Iron Giant had completed the one job that suited it. That did not make it the best machine on the farm. It made it valuable in a way the crowd had forgotten how to recognize. The next morning, Elias drove it back onto the trailer. The iron wheels struck the steel ramps with slow, heavy blows. No one laughed. Workers stopped to watch as Elias secured the chains. Even the dealership technician took a photograph of the flywheel and old mechanical ignition. Before leaving, Nathan stood beside the trailer. "I said a $500,000 tractor made that thing irrelevant." Elias tightened the final binder. "And now?" Nathan looked toward the rescued grain cart. "Now I think relevance depends on the problem." Elias climbed into his pickup. That was close enough to the truth. The Iron Giant had not defeated modern agriculture. It could not plant with GPS precision, cover thousands of acres efficiently, or protect itself from a careless operator. But when a loaded cart sat trapped against a clay bank, when force needed to be redirected rather than increased, and when a failed signal caused the modern system to step back, the machine from 1917 still had something useful to offer. Not greater horsepower, not greater intelligence. A slower, simpler connection between the farmer, the machine, and the load. Elias drove away as sunlight broke through the clouds. Behind him, Nathan's tractor returned to the field. Ahead of him, the Iron Giant rested on the trailer, mud still packed between its steel lugs. The old machine had not shamed the future by proving the past was stronger. It had shamed the future by exposing a mistake people made in every generation. They kept asking which machine had more power. Elias had asked where the power needed to go.